Hey everybody, Koldar here. Today we are looking at Heroic Windlord Mel'jarak. And because of the changes on Heroic to this fight, unlike normal difficulty where the fight is pretty much two unique phases and they're sort of separated where you deal with the adds up front and then you're dealing with the boss in the back end of the fight, instead on Heroic, the entire fight is pretty much one long phase with the same basic parts and components to it. So because of that, I think for the video, I'll just kind of run through the fight a few times and talk through what we're doing at the moment, as well as, general mechanics for Heroic, how things change, and how you may or may not want to deal with those. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Now, the most important change on Heroic is a new ability called Reinforcements. And essentially this changes how you deal with the adds when you kill any given set of add type. So on normal, as you'll remember, if you kill a set of adds, like the battle menders, for example, which we are doing first here, then they're dead and they're gone for the rest of the encounter. And that's why on normal, as I mentioned earlier in the video, things are pretty much split up into phases. The first half of the fight, you're dealing with all the adds, you burn through them, you survive long enough to kill them all off, and then that's it. Then you're on to the second half of the fight where you're just against the boss. But on Heroic, you're basically always dealing with the boss and the adds in some way. This is because when you kill a set of adds on Heroic, again like the Menders, they're dead and gone, just like a normal, but after 45 seconds of that set being killed, the boss will resummon a new set of those add types into the fight via reinforcements. And these will spawn in the back of the platform there and just re-engage the raid. You have to pick them up or do whatever you want. So this means that while you can and should kill the adds, when you do so, you only get 45 seconds of a grace period before they will come back and ruin your day. So the good news is that there is a benefit to actually killing the adds, because otherwise you think, well, what's the point? They're just going to come back. And to a degree, that's true. If you spend all your time doing damage to the adds and not any damage to the boss, you won't kill him in time. But to help alleviate this issue, the debuff that the boss gains when a set of adds is killed, called Recklessness, is a lot different in Heroic. So on normal, this is a permanent buff because the adds are killed and therefore permanently dead. So this buff stacks up to 3 times, and it gives him 50% more damage outgoing and 33% more damage incoming. But on Heroic, while his outgoing damage is the same, the damage he takes is 600% more. And Recklessness is no longer permanent, it's a 30-second buff. So what this basically means is you kill a set of adds, he gets Recklessness, you immediately burn the boss for those 30 seconds as much as you can to take advantage of that 600% damage taken buff. And then when the Recklessness is gone, back on to the adds that are active at the time, if there are any, kill them off, back on the boss when he has Recklessness, and repeat this back and forth. Now, as I mentioned, this continues throughout the entire fight, so this pattern is really simple once you get used to it, especially when you kill the first set of adds, then you're sort of alternating. But from a strategic standpoint, it's not that complicated, right? You kill a set of adds, then attack the boss for 30 seconds, then back on the adds, and so on. So the other major thing with the adds is that, just like in normal, you can crowd control them. In the case of Heroic, you can crowd control up to 3 targets at most. If you crowd control any more than that, just like in normal, they will all be broken and you'll have to reapply your crowd controls. However, in Heroic, this 3 target limit never changes throughout the fight. So it doesn't matter if you kill adds or not. You will always be able to crowd control 3 targets, even the same 3 the entire duration of the fight, which is probably ideal. So that makes things quite a bit simpler from that perspective. You pick your 3 targets, you crowd control them, keep them crowd controlled the entire time, and you'll be fine. So, yeah, that's sort of the overall summary of how the fight goes. And I think we'll get into some of the specifics of various mechanics and how you have to deal with them. So, deciding which 3 mobs to crowd control can be one of the more difficult aspects to plan ahead for this fight. Obviously, it depends greatly on your raid composition and the strengths of your raid members therein. That said, I will talk a little bit about the method that we decided to use and why, and then I'll go back through and talk about some of the other combinations that you can go with and how that will change based on your raid composition. So, the method that we used is to crowd control all 3 amber trappers for the entire fight. And there are 3 basic reasons for this. The first reason is probably the most important, and unfortunately it's a very binary determination whether your raid has a priest or not. I know it's all supposed to be about bring the player, not the class, yada yada, but in this case it's all about the class. The reason for this is because priests have Mass Dispel. And Mass Dispel can be used to almost completely negate quickening buffs cast by Menders. So in this setup, when you're crowd controlling 3 Amber Trappers, obviously you're left with 3 Blade Masters and all 3 Menders. And if 3 Menders are active, they will cast quickening every 12 to 13 seconds. But the buff is a 15-second duration, so this means that obviously the stack will continue to rise as the fight progresses. And especially on Heroic, the amount of damage dealt with a few quickening stacks goes up very quickly. So you need to get rid of that in some way. Of course, Mass Dispel, allowing you to get rid of 7 buffs from 7 mobs in 1.5 seconds or so every 15 is very strong. One priest cannot quite dispel fast enough to keep the stack from ever getting up. It will eventually climb. But generally speaking, the stack casts will occur infrequently enough that by the time the stack gets high, you pretty much are killing those adds anyway, and you don't have to worry about it. That said, even with a priest that should be mass dispelling on cooldown, like clockwork, you probably want one other offensive dispel if you have it available to specifically dispel the boss before he casts Rain of Blades. And this is true in all cases, really, no matter which setup you're using. But you obviously don't want quickening stacks on him boosting his Rain of Blades damage. That's the only way it will be really dangerous. So, yeah. That's the main reason that we're doing this method, is because we have a priest available. When we were first trying this fight, we did not have a priest in the raid. And we still tried this method because we have 2 shamans for purge, as I said. And it sort of works, but it's way more difficult, and most importantly, it takes a lot more global cooldowns, basically, for your raid. You can give each shaman 2 or 3 targets that they purge, but that takes a lot more effort on everyone's part to manage. So, highly recommend, if you have a priest, you try this method, but if not, then you may want to crowd control one of the Menders. If you crowd control at least one Mender, the quickening stacks will never go above 2. They will always fall off on their own at 2 stacks. So that will help a lot. The second reason that we went with this method is because Amber Trappers are annoying, basically. So when they cast Prison or the Path of Goo that spawns underneath a random player, obviously this creates unnecessary movement for the raid. Players have to coordinate to move to someone that's prisoned and break them out, or they have to run around and drop the pool in some place. And while this is not difficult early on, when you start getting the wind bombs, which you will for the majority of the fight, this can be a lot more dangerous. You don't really want people moving around if you can help it, because it's just more difficult to manage wind bomb positions and avoid running into wind bombs and all that good stuff. So that's the main reason we went with no trappers for control purposes. But if you need to have a trapper active, then as few as possible is probably ideal. The more you have to run around for those prisons and pools, the more difficult it will be, and the more time you have to dedicate to not doing DPS or healing or whatever it is. So the final reason that we went with this method is because we have a lot of abilities that allow us to negate or mitigate the Korthic strike damage from Blade Masters. So just like a normal, if you have 3 Blade Masters active, they are going to all target the same person with their strike, and without a cooldown, or without being a tank or something, that player's probably going to die. The damage is about 160,000 per Blade Master. So, what is that? 480? Yeah, 480 physical, but it does not mitigate from armor. So most players are not going to have that much health, even if they're full health. So you have to cool down that in some way. There, again, are a few ways to do this. We actually don't have the best method for it. The easiest method is to have a Disciplined Priest as one of your healers. They can use Power Word Shield, and if the player's full health plus a Power Word Shield, it's probably enough to save that person in all cases. In our case, we had the next best thing, which is a lot of outside cooldowns. So we have 2 Paladins, which each can talent so they can do 2 Hands of Protection back to back. And then, of course, as a healer monk, I have a strong Absorb Shield that I can cast on someone as well every 3 minutes. And then, of course, you have downtime. When you kill the Blade Masters, they have to respawn after 45 seconds, so it's much easier to get your cooldowns to come back up in that time frame. So that's really the third reason that we went with it. So the first is the Priest for Dispelling Quickening. Second is just whether you want to deal with the Trapper, prison and pool, kiting and all that stuff. And finally is whether you can deal with the Blade Masters, since 3 of them will be active and you need to cool down that or absorb some of that damage in some way. So the second crowd control method is a 2-2-2, which basically is just crowd controlling 1 of every ad type. So this has a lot of advantages. The main advantage is that your raid composition is almost entirely irrelevant. There aren't enough mechanics that force you to deal with a specific ability in any given way. So for example, you will have 2 or fewer Menders, which, as I mentioned, means that quickening will fall on its own. You don't need to dispel that manually. Again, I would suggest you dispel it off the main boss before Rain of Blades, because you don't want to heal extra damage from that, but that's about it. Blade Masters, likewise, cannot kill people on their own, so with only 2 Blade Masters targeting someone, as long as that player's full health, they'll only take 320,000 at most, so a fairly minor amount of damage. And then finally, Trappers, while obviously they will prison people, the frequency of prisons will never be greater than the cooldown time of the debuff players gain from breaking prisons out, meaning you'll always have someone available to break fresh prison players with 2 of them or fewer active. So all that means is, aside from perhaps 1 offensive dispel available for the boss before Rain of Blades, everything else is entirely optional. You'll have presumably at least 2 interrupts for Menders for their heals, and everything else is irrelevant. So your raid makeup is entirely up in the air in this method, and that's one advantage. The other advantage is that, generally speaking, you will get more opportunities in a given period of time in which to DPS the boss because of recklessness. So obviously, if you're CCing all 3 of one ad type, like the first strategy, you're only killing 2 sets of ads, even though you're DPSing 6 targets, and therefore killing them slightly faster than you would with only 2 targets for each ad type. If you're doing a 2-2-2 method, again, you're only DPSing 6 ad targets, but it's 3 separate ad types. So it will take a little bit longer before they all start to die, but once they get low, you can kill off that first set of ads, DPS the boss for 30 seconds of recklessness, kill the second set of ads, DPS the boss again, During that second kill phase, the first set of ads will respawn, and then you'll kill the third set of ads after that second recklessness. And then during that third recklessness, the second set of ads will respawn, and so on. So you basically get 3 back-to-back periods, or 90 seconds of full DPS time on the boss, almost entirely. So that can be pretty handy. You can use a lot of your cooldowns and bloodlust and all that stuff in that period. Keep in mind that recklessness does not stack, so you don't want to kill ads too early such that it overwrites a previous recklessness. You want to take full advantage of that 30 seconds. So once recklessness falls or is about to fall, then you can finish off the next closest ad set. Now the big disadvantage to this method is pretty much because ads will come in as the fight progresses, you need to have a method to crowd control them quickly. So obviously you don't see it here, but probably the easiest thing to do is to have whatever player is assigned to crowd controlling their particular ad type stand in the back of the room or near it, and as soon as the mobs land, start crowd controlling one of them in that pack. Then let the other 2 that are not crowd controlled run in to the raid, and your tank or tanks pick them up from there. If you try to wait until they're into the group before you pull one out and crowd control it, you can do it, but it's going to be a pain. So I would do it as soon as they land, and that way it's much easier to target them, and they're separated from the rest of the raid for the most part. And then you'll be able to just pick out one of every trio that comes down and repeat that process over and over. So yeah, it's a pretty viable method. Again, if your raid makeup is weird or you don't think you can handle the trios of any of the ad types, this one will work out. You just have to be very careful about running around for trapper stuff with all the wind bombs that are active. That's the biggest disadvantage. Now, the final CC method I would recommend as one of the stronger ones is to crowd control 2 trappers and 1 mender. So this would be a good method if you don't have a form of mass dispel for using 3 menders, but you do have a way to deal with blade masters. So this means, again, some outside cooldowns for blade master targets that are getting strike cast on them, and you want to limit the amount of CC you have to deal with from the trappers. Obviously, you'll be left with just 1 trapper, and so movement to break prisons and all that stuff is as low as it can be if you're allowing any of them to be active. This is also a good method if you don't have quite enough interrupts to deal with 3 menders. Obviously, with 2 of them active, you only need 2 interrupters, and that's pretty simple. So yeah, I would suggest this one if you can deal with blade masters, basically. Everything else is pretty irrelevant. One thing to be careful of is that you have enough cooldowns for the strike itself. So this can be in the form of personal cooldowns. So right here, I'm getting charged, and I use Dampen Harm as one of my monk talents. And that completely mitigates the damage, basically reducing every hit by 50%. So monks are great for this. They can pretty much absorb almost all of them on themselves with just personal cooldowns. So if your raid has a lot of personal cooldowns or just can save them, if they get targeted by Korthic's Strike, they get a debuff for 2 or 3 seconds before the strike actually hits to indicate who's being targeted. Likewise, anybody that can use a castable cooldown should add some indicator to show them on their unit frames, such as grid, who is getting targeted by Korthic's Strike. Again, just add the debuff as appropriate. So there it's on our enhancement shaman, and one of the paladins casts a Hand of Protection on him, and then he absorbs it. So yeah, if you can find a way to deal with 3 blade masters, but you don't have mass dispel, then this is a great method for that. Alright, so finally we'll talk a little bit about the DPS requirements. So the DPS requirement is pretty lax on this fight. You have 8 minutes for Berserk, and in that time you will probably be able to kill 6 sets of ads if you're using ad sets of pairs. If you're using a 2-2-2 method, or where somewhere where you have 3 sets of ads, you can probably kill 7 or maybe even 8 ads sets. But for now, I'll assume you're just doing 2 ad sets and CCing the other ones, like we're doing here. But pretty much any raid makeup with adequate DPS to be doing this content shouldn't have any problem killing 6 sets of ads in that time and DPSing the boss for those 30-second periods afterward. So if you look at the boss's health, he has 588 million, almost 589. And since you're attacking him while he has recklessness, or he's taking 600% extra damage, we can basically just divide his health and equalize what that would equal if you weren't attacking with that 600% extra. So dividing his health, we get 84.1 million normalized health. So if you're just attacking him straight, accounting for the 600% buff. So if you only attack him over the 3 minutes where he has recklessness, 6 times for 30 seconds each is the 3-minute period, then your raid has to do 467,000 DPS over those 3 minutes, which is fairly reasonable, right? If you have 5 DPS without even tank damage, that's only 93,000 per DPS player. And again, this is only if you were to attack him while he has recklessness. Obviously, that's not the case. You're actually focusing him during recklessness, but he still takes damage throughout the fight because you're AEing all the other ads down. And generally speaking, you're cleaving off the boss and all that stuff. So you shouldn't really have much trouble beating the DPS requirement. Focus more on controlling the ads, burning them down first and foremost, prioritizing your CCs, and all that good stuff. And then just make sure you announce when recklessness is about to hit, and everyone can switch to the boss with plenty of time and just get the rotation going so that they're maximizing their damage during that. And yeah, that's about it though. So Windlord is one of the easier heroic bosses. Again, depends quite a bit on your raid makeup, but you just have to mix and match which mobs you want to CC based on that, and put in a few practice attempts, and you should get it pretty quickly. So, not much else to say, I think. I'll go ahead and let the fight finish out here, and good luck, and thanks for watching.